This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupting. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man.
Breaking right now at 8, an historic night for the nation as Donald Trump becomes the first former U.S. president convicted of felony crimes. From reaction across the tri-state area to the impact on the presidential election, we have live team coverage for you. Good evening, I'm Maurice Dubois.
And I'm Christine Johnson. Jurors in Trump's hush money trial found him guilty on all 34 counts.
That jury, made up of 7 men and 5 women, sided with prosecutors who said Trump violated the law by falsifying business records to cover up a $130,000 payment to the adult film star Stormy Daniels ahead of the 2016 election. And
not long after the verdict was read, the former president left the courthouse in Lower Manhattan and arrived at Trump Tower. A large crowd was there waiting for him. And within the last hour, we saw Trump's motorcade leave Trump Tower once again. But it is unclear right now where he is headed. We do know that the former president is scheduled for an event tomorrow morning here in the city.
So what's next in the case? Trump is scheduled to be sentenced on July 11th at 10 a.m. We've got a team of reporters covering every angle of this historic verdict. Let's begin at the courthouse in Lower Manhattan, where CBS 2's Dick Brennan and Alice Gaynor are standing by. Dick and Alice, good evening to you.
Good evening to you, Maurice and Christine. And Alice and I have literally been watching the cordon being drawn down. I mean, we just saw the gates go, right?
Yeah, the NYPD, they've been out here. They've been removing those metal barricades that have been in front of the courthouse for the entire trial, a sign that things here will go back to, should we say, normal.
Hard to believe, because it was just a few hours ago, Alice, you were sitting in that courtroom in one of the most dramatic moments in jurisprudence in American history. I don't think I'm overstating that. A former president literally being found guilty. What was that precise moment like when the verdict was read?
It was surprising, not because they reached a verdict, but because the judge had just told us at about, 4:14 that I'm going to give the jury a few more minutes, because typically they end the day at 4:30, and then I'm going to dismiss them.
Right.
So everyone is reporting, sending updates. The jury doesn't have a verdict today. They're going to be dismissed. And then all of a sudden, it's 4:30, and we're still not leaving the courtroom. The judge came in a little after 4:30, said, I received a note at 4:20 from the jury. They have reached a verdict. They would like 30 more minutes to fill out the forms. So people audibly gasped in the courtroom. Again, not because there was a verdict, but because we thought everyone was going home. So that was surprising.
And when those words were read, I mean, what was I know you couldn't precisely see what the former president looked like, but you saw him as he started to walk out. What was his demeanor?
So when he walked out after the verdict was read, he was red in the face and he looked very angry. He reached for his son Eric's hand. I don't know if he quite shook his hand or what that gesture was, but he walked out scowling and he was sweating.
Right.
And he's talked about the temperature in the courtroom quite a bit.
Right.
It was comfortable today. It wasn't freezing, it wasn't warm because it's varied. It was the right temperature, but he was sweating.
What about the jury?
The jury, they have had such a poker face this entire trial. They had no tells, they had no visible expressions, and when they walked out, it was hard to tell. I don't know what they felt when they went back to that jury room. I mean, this has consumed their life all these weeks. I mean, they've had to, it's hard to tell if people in their life, their colleagues and family, kind of figured out which trial they were sitting on. It's an anonymous jury, so we don't know their names.
And in addition to the press, a lot of people sitting there, some former judges in there that I know you spoke to, too.
That's right. There's a retired criminal court judge here in New York, George Grasso, and he has been in that courtroom every day. He has an center aisle seat. He has a clear view. I spoke with him after today's verdict because I wanted to know his reaction, what he thought about the 2 days of deliberations, then a verdict, and the certain things the jury had asked for.
They absorbed the evidence. They asked the right questions. When they got their readback, they wanted to make sure they had the rules of the road correctly. When they brought in the David Pecker testimony and the Michael Cohen testimony regarding the now infamous Trump Tower organization, it's obvious they believe they got the corroboration they needed on Michael Cohen. I thought David Pecker was a very strong witness, and I thought those readbacks were quite ominous.
Frustrated, I think. Because about an hour or so this morning was spent doing testimony readback, like he mentioned, of Michael Cohen and David Pecker, and then also the judge reread some of his instructions to the jury, and then we didn't hear from them all day.
And now the big question, I think, is what happens next. We know the Trump team already said they're going to appeal, and that certainly could be a drawn-out process, right?
Mm-hmm. And the former president spoke right after, he walked out angry, but he did stop like he usually does, and he spoke to those courtroom cameras.
Yeah, and I spoke to Arthur Aidala, who doesn't work for Trump per se, but he's been in touch with the team. He told me today that there's going to be a lot to appeal. Let's listen.
I think the real hard part for this judge is going to be to craft a sentence that makes sense. He can't give him, what's going to give him, probation? This guy's followed by Secret Service all the time. It usually takes about a year. A year from today, maybe you'll be arguing the appeal, and then there is no time limit as to when they get the decision.
So you heard him, he said it usually takes a year, which means this carries past the presidential election. And let's face it, this was the one trial of the four that Trump might have been facing that could have gotten done in time for the presidential election. It did, but as we know, we've got a sentencing in July.
July 11th.
July 11th, 4 days before the Republican National Convention, and we know that Trump is already planning things tomorrow. So he's going to pivot pretty quickly to a campaign.
There was one interesting moment. The judge stopped and said, "What about bail status?" The prosecution was like, "There's no bail."
Yeah.
So that was a moment there.
And Alvin Bragg said tonight, he was asked, "Okay, are you going to recommend prison time?" And he, of course, said he didn't want to go there today. And he said, "You know what? Let's wait and see. We're going to have our proposal, but that's going to be coming in the next month." And something tells me you'll be sitting here on July 11th for sure.
Yeah, and talking about the jury and the tremendous pressure they must have been facing and feeling. And again, we don't know. We have not spoken to them. They're anonymous. But just thinking back to jury selection and how many people were dismissed because they felt they couldn't be fair and impartial. Right. And also the stress and anxiety. We heard a few people start crying just during the selection process because they couldn't take the stress of it all. So you have to really hand it to these jurors because they kept their composure, they were here on time, they were taking notes, and they did their service.
And that's what people say about New York jurors. They listen to the judge and they listen to the law. Unfortunately, they had to listen to everything around here too, and that's part of the pressure that you're talking about. And that's not going to get any less. That's going to get worse, correct?
So it's up to them now if they want to speak out, talk to any press. Again, they were anonymous. The attorneys knew their names. We did not. We know some of their occupations. There was a teacher, two attorneys on the jury, and though they were not criminal attorneys, a civil litigator and a corporate attorney. Right. And one of them said, when they were being selected, I don't know much about.
Right. He said, I don't know anything about criminal law, which is very different. Well, incredible job, Alice Gaynor in the courtroom, and Maurice and Christine, back to you.
Great work, you guys. Thank you for the insight. Appreciate it.